If I were to give you the map of the Middle East and I asked you to point out Mesopotamia, would you be able to? What if I told you that Mesopotamia is actually a Greek word that means between the rivers? Now look again and tell me if you'd be able to. Mesopotamia is located where present-day Iraq is now. Located between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, Mesopotamia is known to be one of the earliest civilizations that organized a formal code of law, a writing system, and institutions for trading. Mesopotamia was an ancient civilization that began around 3500 BC. It was made up of three separate civilizations: the Sumerian, the Babylonians, and the Assyrian. Weapons ranging between the three civilizations didn't differ too much, but obviously it did, because for one of them, it made a huge difference. The Sumerian had a very powerful army, like any great civilization does. Their soldiers wore helmets made of copper with a leather lining underneath to fit them like a cap. They were obviously used to protect their heads during battle. They also used weapons like bronze socket axes and composite bows and arrows. These bows could actually penetrate leather, and surprisingly, the bronze armor of the time as well. Although the Sumerian had a fine army, it was nothing compared to the Assyrians. And this is where the weapons made a difference. The Assyrians have successfully taken over Babylon using weapons we are actually kind of familiar with today: swords, spears, bows and arrows, slings, and daggers. Okay, so maybe we've never actually used any of those, but we know what they are, right? But also, the Assyrian were the first known to use iron to make their weapons, whereas other people made with bronze. Iron was, and still is, much stronger than bronze, which gave them a great advantage over their enemies. So maybe it wasn't actually how, the Assyrians used their weapons, but maybe it was what they used to make them that made them so great. I don't know. All I know, though, is I would never want to fight against an Assyrian. But what would weaponry be without transportation? Similar to the weapons of the civilization, they also had the same forms of transportation. But the Sumerians did invent what we would know as now the chariot. In 1922 CE, an archaeologist named Sir Leonard Woodley discovered remains of two chariots. They both actually had tires made of leather. These two carts would then be known as the oldest wheeled vehicles in history. Chariots had four wheels and a cart that was basically a gigantic woven basket to hold crops, people, and weapons during warfare. Imagine how you would compare a chariot to a car. That's way different. But at the time, chariots were the best invention ever. Babylonians most commonly used donkeys to transport goods across the land. They would travel as far as cities called Kanish in Turkey. Some Babylonian merchants worked locally though, so they would carry their goods in sacks of cloth over their backs. Heavier loads would carry on pallets made of wood with cloth wrapped around them. Sling bags were most commonly used for local trading. Trading was huge in Mesopotamia. They even traded across the Persian Gulf. For this, Babylonians used riverboats made of bundles of reed and wood. These were strong forms of transportation that made getting goods around extremely easy. Babylonians did also use carts though to carry crops around, which were pulled by wild donkeys and oxen. Wild donkeys and oxen were probably one of the first forms of transportation, of course, after feet, which actually Babylonians, Assyrians, and Sumerians did a lot too. The main reason for transportation in Mesopotamia was trading. The only problem was that Mesopotamia didn't actually have a lot of great land to produce natural resources. But because of the flooding of the rivers every season, the land had nice fertile soil for irrigation. They would grow things such as wheat, barley, dates, and flax to trade. They would also trade materials for building with wood from fast-growing trees in the area. Between the cities, they'd also exchange clothing, wine, precious metals like gold and silver, and jewelry. The royal cemetery is evidence of long-distance trading between the communities. It proved that people of Mesopotamia traded as far east as the Indus River Valley, as far south as the Persian Gulf, up north to the Caucasus Mountains, and over west to Oman. The royal cemetery also proved that ideas were traded as well. For example, the spiral that was found in Mesopotamia was originally created in the highlands of Anatolia. This just proved that ideas, as well as goods, were traded between the two. Another resource greatly used was mud, and as proven by the large walls surrounding the Sumerian towns that were made of mud bricks. Mud bricks were also used to create gigantic palaces for Sumerian kings to live in. These palaces would hold the king, his family, many slaves, and would store wheat, barley, and clothes in which he collected for taxes. The people in each city-state created patterns between the bricks so that the walls would have different patterns to them. Living in Mesopotamia wasn't terrible. They slept on reed mats that were placed over the ground or on a mud brick platform, similar to a bed. They would cook their food in a fire pit inside the hut or in a mud oven in the courtyard of their house. Architecture was fabulous in Mesopotamia, and it shows through their cities. A few examples of those cities would be Ur, Ashur, Babylon, Nimrud, and Kesh. But architecture wasn't the only amazing thing about Mesopotamia. Artwork was sculpted beautifully for individuals and kings. The sculptures were typically based off of the shapes of cones and cylinders. Arms and legs were like pipes, and skirts were smooth and round with a little flare up at the bottom. The statues found at the Abu Temple are great examples of this artwork. Another thing about the statues were that their faces were typically dominated by big eyes that took up most of it. Many small things that you probably wouldn't have known were significant unless they were pointed out to you was the size of the statue and whether or not they had a beard. The size of the statue symbolized how powerful a person was in the hierarchy system. The larger the statue, the higher up on its ranks they were. A beard also symbolized power. For a sculpture with a beard usually meant that that man had an extremely powerful position in the city-state. The Assyrian had their own way of art. It was extremely unique and interesting, to say the least. Typically related to ways of conquest, pillaging of other cities, tearing down cities, and killing. Artwork like this was made to mock any past challengers that thought of trying again. They would also make this work, though, because they felt as though a successful conquest was a blessing to their gods. A helmet found at the royal cemetery of Ur was a work of art from Mesopotamia. But the real art of the sculpture was the helmet. The head is a sculpting of the king's crown, his hair, and his ears. In the king's throne room, they had large paintings covering the walls depicting historical events of the king dominating enemies and wild beasts. Many historians might also agree with me that another form of artwork was Mesopotamian writing. The earliest writing began as pictograms, which were used to keep basic information about crops and taxes. Representation was used in pictograms, like a bull symbolized a bull. Simple as that. As time went on, though, the need for writing changed, and so did the style. Mesopotamian writing became known as cuneiform. Over thousands of years, scribes recorded daily events, trade, astronomy, and literature on clay tablets. Cuneiform was actually thought to be the world's first writing system. It was a close call between the Egyptians and Mesopotamians, but scholars agreed that Mesopotamians came out on top. After they created cuneiform, Mesopotamians began writing poetry and stories. The story that is thought to be the oldest in the entire world is the Epic of Gilgamesh. The Epic of Gilgamesh was written on 12 clay tablets in cuneiform. It was found in an ancient Assyrian library, even though it actually comes from Sumeria. The plot of the story starts off with the king of Uruk, Gilgamesh. He's part man and part god. He is also extremely good looking. After playing around with all the women in the city, the citizens get sick and tired of it, so they pray to their gods. A goddess creates another man, and his name is Enkidu. Despite the fact that Enkidu is half beast and wants to challenge Gilgamesh, the story takes a twist and they become best friends. Classic, right? Well, sadly, Enkidu dies, and that forces Gilgamesh to go on an adventure to look for the secret of immortality. I'm not going to blow the ending for you, but actually, Gilgamesh was the real king. He just wasn't near the same as the Gilgamesh we see in the story. Although the Epic of Gilgamesh was written way before the stories of today, we all have the same thing in common. We all want somebody to get us, to understand us for who we actually are. So when you're complaining about how cliche a book is, don't go blaming Stephanie Meyer, because the real person who started cliche was actually a local Sumerian. An eye for an eye. We've all heard that saying before. It's actually a paraphrase from Hammurabi's Code of Laws. These laws were found on an upright pillar in the city of Susa, which is now modern-day Iran. Hammurabi is one of the most well-known kings of Mesopotamia. He felt as though, to be a powerful ruler, you need a rule system. Many of the laws he wrote may be completely insane to us. For example, If a son of a paramour or a prostitute says to his adoptive father or mother, "You are not my father or my mother," his tongue shall be cut off. I guess that's a bit harsh. But even though some of you might not know the meaning of the swear I'm about to say, that rule is probably made out of something called respect. There are rules, though, that are quite similar. Rule number 6 says that if anyone steals the property in the temple or in the court, he shall be put to death. And also the one who receives a stolen thing from him shall be put to death. Law 22 states that if anyone is committing a robbery and is caught, then he shall be put to death. Okay, so maybe not the whole put to death thing, but you see where I'm coming from. If you were caught committing a robbery, you'd probably be put in jail. If you stole something and sold it to someone else illegally, you'd still be put in jail. So all we've done in modern day is replace death with jail. In total, there were 282 laws written in the Code of Laws. That seems like a lot, but they were not all individually thought of. Hammurabi and his assistants went to other civilizations and collected their rules. He picked and chose the ones that he felt were good, and he threw away the other ones. Then he rewrote the ones that he wanted to make them sound more like him. As you can see, put to death was in a lot of the rules. Most of them, actually. But the harshness of his rules led to his success. A few more examples of these laws would be that if a man strikes a freeborn woman so that she loses her unborn child, he shall pay 10 shekels for her loss. That makes sense, doesn't it? If anyone hire a field laborer, he shall pay him 8 gur of corn per year. And if anyone brings an accusation of any crime before the elders and does not prove what he has charged, he shall, if it be a capital offense charged, be put to death. Thank you for taking a journey back in time with me to ancient Mesopotamia. I hope you enjoyed this little adventure back in time and have a fabulous day while reading all of the cited work.